able to finally mourn your friends or have that funeral to you probably felt like a big weight being lifted off your chest, right? And because there's a lot of studies that have said we need to allow these soldiers to mourn the loss of their buddies, their teammate, whomever, and they didn't let him do that. And you guys just carried on. You carry the weight and that guilt with you. You never had that closure. Yeah. And I think for a lot of soldiers, that's I want to fight, we want to go this, go that, but they finally had studies, that show that just giving them that closure of that time, if possible, makes a big difference in the back end. And you don't carry you're still going to carry it, but you don't carry it as much,
Yeah, no, I remember like the exact moment. We were sitting there, and Preston Paris, who was on our third show, is the other saw gunner in our squad. And we told a story about when he got shot in the neck and landed in Dave's lap. And I went up, did a gunner drill. I remember we were sitting there in Bacuba the first morning we got there when Dave got the firefight Dave got shot in. We called in an airstrike to the house next to us and took over the house we were in the firefight with. And nobody else was online with us at that time, so we had to wait. And we thought, all right, good time to eat. And here we are sitting here eating. I'm eating Pop-Tarts because they carried a lot of calories and they were small and I could carry a ton of them. I'm eating Pop-Tarts and Paris is sitting there eating something. And I look and there's the guy we just killed laying about 2 feet away from him. We're having breakfast and we're like laughing and joking. And I remember looking over going, we're never going to be normal again. This isn't normal. We're like sitting here telling stories he's literally 6 feet away from me. And, the house next door was even worse. And there was guys that had to go into that house. And I'm glad I didn't have to go next door because that's where the women were. And the airstrike hit that too. So Dave and our medic had to go over there and first. And that day still carries a lot of weight with a lot of people because we were by ourselves. If we didn't get that airstrike, we were screwed. There was about 30 guys coming, and the airstrike came. They came in. Apaches came in and caught them, but they were attacking us from one house and flanking us from another. And without the air support, we would have been in deep, deep trouble. But that day, it was just like yeah, when I come home, there's no way I'm going to be able to tell this story the right way. Yeah. I can't recapture my mindset from that moment and put it into words to really take somebody there, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
because when you're sitting there, it's so like the smells and remembering that there were blueberry Pop-Tarts, like shit like that, like it just sticks with you. Like you can't really, the sensory of it, you can't translate to people.
Also to my most recent trauma, I in my EMDR, the psychologist who's doing my EMDR treatment, she said, hey, maybe we start with the fires because that was your most recent trauma. And I was irritated by her suggestion. And, I was just like, no, let's work on, blah, 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 from my childhood. I was aggravated, angry. And so one of the things I also learned is that the first chance, when I feel myself getting, of course, what that anger was I was triggered. I don't want to relive that. It was, you still, one of the, of course, the 4 kind of symptoms of PTSD, and one of them is avoiding the reliving of it. And I didn't want to relive it. And so I, of course, that's on my list of things to kind of work on and with her. But basically, we started, one of the things in my research, and I have a coaching business, and I deal with mostly people who are in trauma. Not very many veterans, but first responders. I have some of those, and then sexual trauma. I end up with a lot of people with sexual trauma. And one of the things, in my research about PTSD is that not everybody gets PTSD. So we were next to, or at least gets PTSD to the not being able to be functional. And so it has its roots in definitely layering. And so if you had if you had a reasonably safe childhood, is what we've found. If you have a reasonably safe childhood and you are able to go back to that place, that's where normal people go when there is external trauma. And childhood trauma, where we have been betrayed badly and abandoned or abandoned, that's internal trauma. But what happens to us in a war zone or whatever, that's external trauma. But if you've had a childhood that was betrayed like that, and you were traumatized either by sexual trauma or whatever, those people are, I can't remember the percentage, but it's high for them to develop then, especially for soldiers and first responders. It's a high percentage of them that develop PTSD, actual clinically diagnosed PTSD. And that makes sense. And of course, that was the case in my life.
Yeah.
If I could, Cliff, I'd actually caveat
Sure.
off of what Rachel's saying there, because obviously with Veteran Trash Talk, we are focused on the trauma that the veterans experienced during their service, and rightly so. But what Rachel just touched on, it's through Veteran Trash Talk that I've learned that I do have PTSD. I do have childhood trauma that I've never really appreciated the impact it's had on me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a valid point, that if I'd have went to combat, what would that look like? As far from a PTSD standpoint, because I was already carrying undiagnosed, unrecognized PTSD.
Yeah.
And I'm just piling on that. And I think if there was some investigating done amongst our community, those that are suffering the greatest are probably also carrying that childhood trauma with them. I would have to say, maybe the difference between the person who handles it, what we call a little bit better, or affects them more, what baggage were they already carrying with them?
Yeah.
And I would highly recommend to those of us who have a habit of saying, I'm not a combat veteran, but like Buddy Beckwith said in one of the first Veteran Trash Talk hours that I watched, that we all have PTSD. From the moment we went through that basic training and they started twisting and contorting our mind to, create the mindset that they wanted, that alone is going to give you a form of PTSD. That's why we feel like, combat or no combat, we feel like we don't fit out here in this civilian world. Well, we fit, we have a lot of added value that comes with us, but I think we have to recognize that PTSD and trauma is on a sliding scale, and never, ever, ever downplay your trauma, your PTSD, because it is personal to you. And as such, it should be dealt with in a way that is constructive to you moving forward with good mental health. And I'm in the very, very early stages of my journey, very early stages. And I can just taking those first steps. It's freedom. That's, we all want freedom. I'm feeling free. I'm truly feeling free for the first time in maybe my entire life, and very, very hopeful about where this journey's going to take us. And the one thing I'd like to add also is that our last guest, Ron, said that if you look around, you are probably the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with. And if I'm the average of the 5 people that I surround myself, well, then I can't wait to see what's going to happen. I can't wait to see what this is.
You ever look at that group of 5 and think, I wonder if I'm the bottom ranking guy. I wonder if I'm bringing the average down or if I'm bringing it up.
I'm always bringing it up.
I think that one of the things that's important is that it doesn't matter. I mean, it does matter, but it doesn't necessarily matter in the big scheme of things what caused our trauma and who caused it. It's not fair. I think you just have to basically say it's not fair. Where the military was concerned, I chose to stand in that gap. So that trauma is a little different, but it doesn't matter if it was I don't mean to say it doesn't matter in the sense that it's not valued and that we don't, and that I'm not valued or that I don't value it myself. But ultimately, the real cruel thing is we are responsible for healing this one precious life.
Yeah.
And so, and no one else can do that for us. And so, some of the anger that I suffered when I got home was this marriage that I had with this trauma. And so some of how I defined myself, some of the value that I felt like I had to offer to the world was that I was a member of this very traumatized combat club. And yet it was the very thing, holding on to that and not letting it go was the very thing that I needed to do to get better and to be able to even have a relationship. It was stopping me from everything. And I needed to learn how to bifurcate that.
Yeah.
And see that I was still, just by letting go and beginning to deal with and become friends with my trauma and reduce who was talking in all of my relationships, because in all of my relationships, my trauma person was talking. My trauma person was having all of the say in every choice I made, in every very bad relationship choice I made, in every way. So getting in control of who was doing all of my talking was so incredibly important. And I didn't have to not be a person who had seen combat, or I didn't have to be anybody different. I still had that value. But for me, I think I had to learn how to separate those two entities and recognize what needed to go and stop having control, and what parts of me still had intense value because I decided to serve. And that's a difficult task.
And actually, Rachel, so I mean, so the process I'm hearing you is saying give those voices some balance instead of giving one more power than the rest. They all should be equally heard, so you can address them equally to diminish their impact on your daily life equally.
There's some pride, I think, involved, or that was involved in me and being. It's so hard to discuss this because people get real angry with me when I talk about this. But the wounds, it was kind of like my combat wound, and I petted it, and I took care of it because it was what I was leading with. It was the value that I felt like I brought to the world. And I remember getting back and being so angry because I came, to this area and needed to be employed at some level, and nobody was willing to pay me what I had been paid, and nobody was willing, nobody saw that value. And I got angrier and angrier and angrier because nobody could understand what I'd been through. That was frustrating. And I dated a guy, I remember one time, who said to me, we were talking about what we did last summer or something in a group of people that we were out with, and everybody was talking about the rodeos they'd been to and everything. And somebody said, well, how about you, Rachel? Because I'd been just kind of quiet. And I said, well, I was in Iraq. And yes, it was hot. I mean, because everybody was talking about, it was like 2011 and everybody was talking about how hot it was. And I remember when we left, that guy said, you need to get the hell out of Iraq. And so then I realized that as a female, I was not going to be able to date a guy that did not understand. Whereas a male, you can find a woman who kind of worships the ground you walk on and sees you as a hero. But as a female, no man was going to want to date somebody who had outmanned him. And so that was also isolating. It left me my dating pool dried up to a tiny little puddle. And the one guy that, I dated finally initially, he was not a veteran, but he at least got me. And I remember him, but even he would say, you do know, and he would say it in the most kind way. He'd say, you do know you're absolutely bonkers psycho, right? And I would kind of laugh and say, yes, I do. I mean, he tolerated, and we are still friends today. We don't date anymore, but we're friends. But it was lonely. I think that was probably more than anything. I came to an area that was very remote. There was no treatment for PTSD. So when I initially came home, I was so lonely that I can't even. And then I ended up taking care of somebody's horses while they were gone, and a little colt had been running around or something and got stepped off in a hole or something, and had a compound fracture where the whole bone was, sticking out of the hock of the animal. And I was trying, and these were horses out in a big section, and it was getting to be night. And I knew the coyotes we have, it's just kind of wild out here.
Yeah.
And I just knew these coyotes would come and eat this little colt alive. And so then I had to go shoot the colt.
Yep.
And, well, that did it. I mean, I was I can't even, I called my first sergeant, the guy that at that time, he was what we call my handler, because it was the unit that I was, at that time I was a contractor. And I said, look, I got to come back. And that was the reality. The reality was there was no way I was going to be able to get treatment out here in Northwest Oklahoma. So, the old saying, it's crazy not to be crazy in a crazy place. But also, when you're crazy like that, you need a crazy place. And so I had to go back, and then I did, and I made myself available to the treatment that was available overseas, and I just took another year mission as a contractor, and then I linked up with the unit, and then I just did all of that same stuff. And so at the end of the day, it really is. It's complex, and everybody reacts to it different, but it does have some real markers, because we're all talking, and there's so many of them that are the same. Ultimately, when it gets down to the nut cutting, we are all the same.
Yeah. That's one thing I talk about. And sorry, my younger son stepped in. He
mine too, except he didn't step in.
Oh yeah, he will one day.
He was wanting to make it rain Cheerios here for a minute. Mama had to come get him.
Oh, that's all good. Hey, in my show, kids can come in, because mine will come in and step in, and that's fine, because kids come first in my life. But Lloyd's got Valentine's Day on Monday, so my oldest son's taking to the dollar store to buy little gifts. Well, we don't do candy, so he's going to buy little toys, and so he wanted to make sure he knew the exact number of what to buy for the boys and girls. But one thing I talk about with PTSD is like you said, Rachel, it affects everybody differently. There's things in my life that have profound effect on me that probably wouldn't bother three of you sitting here today. And we have to know that that's okay. Just because you had a similar experience, let's say, Joe, let's say you and I were together on a mission, and it affected me, but it didn't affect you. That doesn't make it any less, right? It doesn't make me less of a person. Doesn't make me less of anything.
We play different roles.
Yeah.
And there's no way you could play the same role as me. There's no way I could play the same role as you. And that brings me back to something that Kevin said, and that I've heard multiple times, mainly from civilians, is, well, I was told I have PTSD, but nothing like what you have going on. And I stop people the minute they do stuff like that. I said, hey, I tell you one thing we don't do at Veteran Trash Talk, and one thing I'll never do is attempt to validate one's trauma.
Yeah, no.
It's a fingerprint. There are no two events. Then it's not the same.
No,
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And there's not a person in the world that can debate you and tell you MST and PTSD can be relatable, because the experiences, based on the experiences. Yeah. They're relatable based on the effects the experience have on you. But the experiences are so much different. So you can't validate what happened to somebody as on the scale of how much of a hardship that was, because that's completely unfair. Yeah. You can't see it from their eyes. You can't be in their shoes. You weren't there for it. So you never know. You know, like the day Paris got shot in the neck. I'm sure that probably bothered me and Dave more than it bothered him.
Yeah.
Because we thought he was a goner. No, luckily he looks like Mr. Olympia, and he's a big farm boy from the, I mean, his neck is about this big around. So I think that's what saved him. But yeah, you see a guy drop like that, and Dave and I never talk about it. We've talked about it twice since it happened.
Yeah.
But when he looked at me, he knew what he was saying. And it was, because I was his guy. I was his saw gunner. He was my team leader. And he looked me dead in the face, and I could tell in that moment he wanted to cry, because what he was saying was, "I'm sorry, you got to go up there."
Yeah. Because
he's in my lap, bleeding from the neck. That's the rules. Whoever gets the guy down, the other guy's the gunner.
Yeah.
And so yeah, luckily I'm still here. We're all still here to talk about it. So there was somebody looking out for us that day.
Yeah.
I took a direct strike to the strike glass, and the round, I almost watched it slow down in the glass, and it shot a shard of the strike glass that's that thick right off the bridge of my nose, which my nose is huge, but still, that was a direct hit.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the windshield, and he was shooting me. And that strike glass, I mean, Nick, same thing with Nick.
Yeah.
Had a sniper take a strike glass shot at him. You telling me sitting up in that tower for another 400 days straight doesn't do something to you?
Yeah.
You know, it's the monotony of having to be hyper vigilant 24 hours a day.
Yeah. And it's the exhaustion.
That is almost it. It's like trying to turn it off. You ever seen those guys when the oil leaks and they're trying to turn it off?
Yeah.
It's like trying to turn that off. You know, it's so powerful. When, you know, the longer you do it. I won't ramble on, but I had a sergeant major when we were in Kuwait. We were getting ready to go. I was brand new private first class. We were getting assimilated to the weather, or acclimated. I'm sorry. Yeah. So we hadn't even been there yet. I hadn't been anywhere. I went through SOPSI and went to selection, tore my knee up. Or excuse me, was trying to go to selection, tore my knee up, got medically dropped from the program, ended up in the 82nd. They deployed 45 days later. So that's how much I knew. I'd only been in a real unit for 45 days, and the sergeant major comes and sits down with us. We're in Kuwait, you know, where I would think it was, I can't remember the name of that place, but when it's said, Buring.
Buring.
Yeah,
You're probably in Buring.
So we're sitting there, and we got like,
did they have an airfield there?
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah, it's Buring.
Yeah, but we were, sitting there where everybody eats, and the sergeant major comes and sits down, and we all like stand straight up. He goes, "Sit down." He sits with us for a second, and he goes, "I know you guys are. I know where you're going, and you're probably going to see some shit." And he said, "I'm going to tell you something." He said, "You're going to see something, and in that moment, you're either going to react to your training or you're going to freeze, and I highly doubt a bunch of paratroopers are going to freeze. So you're going to rely on your training, and it's going to work out, and everything's going to be good. Then you're going to know you can do it. You're going to be a little more comfortable." He said, "Then something's going to happen, and it's going to change everything. One of yours is going to get hurt." He said, "Then you're going to be filled with a lot of anger, and you're going to have to remember to be professional when you go out there, because you're going to want some get back, and you're not going to be afraid of the firefight anymore. You're going to want it." He said, "Then you're going to get to a point where you've been in so many of them that you don't necessarily feel like the day is complete until you get into one.
Yeah.
And then you're going to come home. And it's the worst possible time you could come home mentally because of where you're at. And you're going to have to remember to give yourself some time." And I'll never forget the guy, because he was like Nostradamus, man. He called it. It was exactly the way it went down. By the time we came home, we shouldn't have been released to the public.
No.
Nope.
The way we should have been refit at least once. And we did 15 months out there thinking that somebody was coming to refit us for a month or something. Yeah. Nothing. And so we had this intense, like, man, if you weren't wearing my battalion colors, get away from me.
Yeah.
Because we were out there by ourselves. So when we did our first brigade run, I'm out there still smelling like whiskey from the night before, running around everybody's formation saying the champs are here.
Yeah.
In our blue battalion shirts, looking like Smurfs. Mm-hmm. Because they weren't us. They were 80 Deuce, 3rd Brigade, but they weren't us, because they weren't Charlie Company 2 Panther, and no one came to help us. So we felt like, man, we were it.
Yeah.
And it's a very isolating feeling when you feel like there's only 32 human beings that really understand what's going on.
Yeah.
So
it's tough and it's hard. And when you start, today's been a triggering event for a lot of us. And when you start having those thoughts and feelings, what do? And so what I'm kind of curious about is Rachael, what are the things that you do when you're having a bad day and your PTSD really creeps up and it's just really fucking with your life, right? And I remember when I was on Veterans Trash Talk for the first time, Joe, and you said something to me, and I still laugh about that to this day. You said I used the F word in the most eloquent way of anybody you've ever met in your life. And that cracks me up to this day. Every time I say the F word, I always think about that. I can't get that out of my head. I just
he put some class in the C and F word.
And then after you answer, Rachael, I want Joe to answer the same question, because I think for anybody that's watched this program, it's going to be a triggering event for them. It's been a triggering event for me. There's many times when you're talking, Rachael, and Joe, you're talking, I got goosebumps. My heart rate is racing. You can tell at one point my face was turning red because my heart rate was going up so high. And I was just reliving kind of those moments when I talked about the Pentagon and stuff. And then, and then after you guys get done talking, then I'll talk about some of the things that I do and what I've done to kind of help. The podcast is one of them. It kind of helps talking. And then, one of the things I try with the podcast is, I ask veterans who wrote their own music to send it in, and I'll play it on my podcast. And I've had a couple of veterans do that. And so the music you hear in my podcast sometimes isn't the best music, but I think it's the greatest music, because these guys are using this music and these songs for their recovery. And I'm very honored every time that they send that music to me, because I think for them to hear that music is very powerful and helpful to them. So with that, Rachael, it's just the little things, right? It's the little things in your life that get you through. Joe, when your son walks in, your face lights up and you smile, man, that's just the greatest feeling in the world, right? You just can't beat it. And so those will always outweigh the bad, always. What you just have to realize is, I remember, I got refrated out of the military because I spoke out of mental health. That's the only thing I did wrong on my 34-year career, and I talked about it in one of the episodes. Because some people in my work didn't like me doing it, but I continued.
Yeah.
And the Able channel filmed a documentary on me, and they released it on Veterans Day. And then 2 weeks later, I was notified I was refrated, right? I don't believe in coincidence.